I don't have to stop the sharing. Okay, we're recording now too. Or if you feel comfortable, you could just take the midterm today. Karen said she wanted to take it today.
What?
Didn't you say, rate me, that you wanted to take the midterm today?
You're such a liar.
Thank you. Okay, how many people do we have here? Okay. This is being recorded and I'm remembering to do it today. So let's just go through this. Actually, give me 1 second. Could I do that? Okay. I'm looking over there because that's where that is on my other screen. So this is your midterm. You're going to have to know the dates and significance of some things. So you can't just say Dred Scott. What would you say about Dred Scott? Anybody? Come on.
Wasn't Dred Scott when slaves were like declared as property?
Yeah. What year? It was 1857, but again, you know, I'm trying to avoid a lot of memorization for this class, but certain things are important because that was 3 years. And then I would also add on that, that it was a split decision by the Supreme Court. And you know how I have a love-hate relationship with my home state of Missouri. You should mention that he went from Missouri to Illinois. Okay. Other things on that list? Some of which is from the reading, but when you look at the class recordings, I tried to go beyond the books. And oh no, I got it in there. And some of these people will be paired in essays like discuss the differences between differences and similarities between Martin Delany and Frederick Douglass. Also, one of the things I'm going to be asking a general question about is how are things different from the history that you were taught and why? And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to send you an essay question. No, wait. Would you rather do the essay question over the weekend or would you rather do it next Wednesday, by next Wednesday night?
Wednesday night.
Okay, Bruja. Is that okay with the rest of you?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Because we're kind of going into different topics after that. Okay, there will be reading on Thursday, but you won't have to write about that. Okay, Justine, write that down, okay? Were you writing it down? Oh, so you're not that much of a nerd after all.
No,
You're not a nerd?
not really.
Huh. Daniel, you were wrong. Okay, so you have the list in front of you. Is that it? You know everything? We could go fishing now? I spelled Pocahontas wrong. I spelled Pocomania. I still spelled it wrong. Okay, what else? How do you spell her name? Pocahon A, maybe. How do you spell Pocahontas? Oh, I got it.
Isn't there a T?
Oh,
That was Pocahontas.
yeah. Anyhow, does anybody know how? Justine, anybody? Karen? Ruha? Don't worry about it then. Okay, what about the rest?
Look at the chat.
What?
Look at the chat.
I have to go to find the chat, but I don't have that screen up. So let me go to this screen and go to the chat. Thank you, Karen.
I knew there was a T in it.
I
Wait,
told,
no, I'm wrong.
wait. If this is how we want to spend our review, that's swell with me, but
Pocahontas. There you go.
Poca. Ah. The irony being that that was not her name anyhow, but thank you. And so you should know that's not her name, and you should know the myth around her and why the myth. What else? Everybody's comfortable with the rest of this?
Why is
Oops.
Somebody said the word why. That's always a good clue. Why what?
January 8th and 16th on there?
Where is January 8th? Oh, where is that?
Underneath Brown versus Board of Ed.
Oh no, isn't that when like if you're like
I'm sorry. No, that's like 1/8.
Yeah.
1/16. 1/32. And what is that all referring to?
Isn't that referring to how like African Americans were like thought of as humans? So like they were like, oh, they're like 1/5 of a human, 1/8 of a human.
Partially, but it was also, yeah, I guess you could say that, but it was also to determine who was African American for purposes of exclusion. So in Plessy versus Ferguson, what was that case? And when was it?
That case, isn't it, if you were like one, oh wait, that's a separate and equal case, right?
Yeah, notice how who's speaking?
Marissa.
Yeah, notice how she said separate and equal, not but equal, but separate and equal. What year was it?
1896.
Yeah. There he was 1/8 black. So they decided if you were 1/8, you had to ride in the what they called the colored car only on the train. And it led to the series of legalized Jim Crow laws. And what were the Jim Crow laws?
The laws that didn't allow black people to go to the same restaurants, go drink from the same fountains, all that type of stuff.
Same schools, yeah, everything. Here's something sad in what a cracker town I grew up in. There were two kids in my school, one in my class, and then his cousin in another class, that were named Jim Crow in honor of that law. And I want to talk about something else for a minute, so I'm going to stop sharing. There are two things going on today that are very reminiscent of particularly what we talked about yesterday with the 13th, 14th, and the 15th Amendment and taking away voting rights. Now it's up to 257 state laws are being pushed to suppress voting rights. And it is very reminiscent of where we were in the 1870s and forward. And they talk about Jim Crow laws, and they're making it harder and harder for certain people to vote, or trying to. And it's up in the air whether it's going to hold up in federal courts, because 1/4 of the judges today are Trump appointees. And, the argument that he had the election stolen from him. And so that's one thing to be aware of. This is not an idle past, but it's a process, an institutional process. And I want to see the word institution in a lot of your answers, that has been going on since contact. Number 2, what happened in Atlanta with the 8 murders?
The guy was arrested without any incident.
Okay, but what was he arrested for?
Was it the bombing of the church?
No,
So-
in the last 2 days, what happened?
Didn't he kill? He killed 8 people, and
Yeah,
yeah.
and the sheriff said, well, he was having a bad day. His bad day was that he killed 8 people, 7 of them women, 6 of them Asian. And since the COVID-19, Asians have become targets. And the sheriff said, well, he said that it wasn't racially motivated. They were women and they were Asians, and they were at stores owned by Asians. So, I'm not buying that. The hate crimes against Asians have grown astronomically since Trump pronounced it the Asian flu and then the Kung Fu flu. Similarly, after 9/11, Muslims were targets. We talked a little bit about the clans being targeted. And this is all otherization that is not history, it's contemporary. And we will talk more about this after the midterm. But just to watch that sheriff say he was having a bad day, or a lot of the media saying that it wasn't a hate crime, and not even, we know his name, we know their names now, but very few, their names aren't barely mentioned. They're still dehumanized. Or they might have been sex workers, maybe not, massage parlors. There was, so it's just, again, it's a repeat of what we've been talking about the whole semester. Any thoughts on that? I mean, go back to Baldwin and go back to Ellison. They were talking about that. This is the first readings we read. This whole otherization. We always have a target. And in my lifetime, I've seen it blacks. And I'm not that old, really, believe me. I've seen it Japanese. I've seen it Chinese. I've seen it Muslims. Now we're seeing Korean, which Sikh. It's just various groups. Certainly Central and South Americans. It's a country built on blaming others and thinking that there's a superior group that has a right to do this. And if you watch that sheriff's tape, I hope you find it really offensive. Any comments?
This is why I stay away from social media, because every single morning I go on Twitter and there's a lot of news about, white people this, how Congress this, Republicans this, whatever. And then there's this news about how the sheriff is like covering for this guy. And when the media portrays a crime, they immediately say Black, Hispanic, or some other, minority. But then when it's a white male who did this crime, they just say male suspect arrested. No, say what he is. He's white. They're all white. They all commit these crimes.
You're right. And
Like-
you knew he was right away, white right away, because they didn't give him a race. And that's the key. And you've added the other component. It's generally 3/4 of 2/3 of the crimes against Asians are done against women and done by males, and almost exclusively white males. You know, and you look at the January 6th group outside of the Capitol, white males mostly. I didn't mean to cut you off, Karen. Did you want to say more?
I was gonna go on a rant because it just really infuriates me. And the thing is, on for Twitter though, if you tweet something like, "Oh, I am tired of white people covering for like hate and terrorist crimes done by their own people," the most interaction that it's going to get are people who are already come to the senses. So I feel like those who aren't at their senses, like these trumpet supporters, they are not, on social media. Like they are doing their own thing. So they are like isolated from basically the Twitter world and like trying to knock sense into them.
They're on social media, but they're on their own social media. They don't read the other stuff. You know, and I'm not a big Twitter person because it's a little too complicated for my pay grade. But I totally agree with what you're saying. And we're going to talk about, have we talked about this yet? No, we haven't. So after the midterm, we're going to talk about class consciousness and false consciousness. And not an excuse, but blaming the other is certainly false consciousness. Now, remember what Baldwin said about the policeman? Even those with good intentions are unaware of what they're doing. There may be many. And it's this lack of knowledge or trying to pin it on individuals rather than institutions. The fact that you've had so many crimes against Asians in the last year is not individual. It's systematic. It's institutional.
And speaking of that, the movement Blue Lives Matter, it's actually trending right now on Twitter because something about Republicans voting against something. I don't know. I just saw that it was trending and I'm like, okay.
What is it? I don't know what trending means, seriously.
Oh, that it's a popular topic being discussed about a lot.
So it's being discussed in different ways. Ibrahim just turned on his camera.
Yeah.
Okay.
I had a quick comment.
Yeah.
I guess it's a question. I just wanted to get your opinion. I don't want to be real too controversial, but because I don't advocate any violence or harm or on any like specific race, and I don't even want to. This is with regard to what's going on with the Asian community nowadays. But I also was thinking about lately how it's also something that's going on in China, and I'm not going to specify China because obviously it's more Asian countries than just China. But what's going on with the Muslims in I don't know how to pronounce the name of the city or the name of the town or whatever it is, but there's a lot of Muslims being persecuted.
Yeah, all of Western China.
Right.
They're put in camps. 2 million of them have been put in camps. I mean, that's another subject, but I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah, and I don't mean to bring that up as to say that one will cause the other, or as to say that because one is wrong, then why should you do the other one? But I just feel like because I am a Muslim and I feel a connection to that, I kind of feel and it's slighted in a specific way when someone says, "Oh, why are people going against our people?" But at the same time, there's something similar going on, maybe worse, in fact, in China.
Well, I think in a way it is worse because it's the government systematically rounding up people, taking people away from their parents, not the way we do here, but we're talking basically, the UN just said it was genocide in China, which is ending of a group. And to be honest, I was in one of those cities. When were the Olympics in China? The year before the Olympics. And they were persecuted then too. It's important in this sense that the United States is not the only country that does it. Until recently, we were pretty quiet about it, but now that we seem to be in a trade war with China, now we're not speaking out as a nation because we care for Muslims, but we want to hurt China. But you'll see, yeah, I mean, it's not unique to the United States is what I'm going to say, and it's often not unique to a targeted minority. And Muslims in many parts of the world, even though it's a large, large religion. Oh, Ibrahim. Karen, did you hear anything he said? Okay. Okay, I see what you're saying. You know, it's not unique to the US that we have genocide. You know, and this is on US history, and we're going to look at specifically this, but it's, you know, you're right to bring that up. What do other students think? It's much more interesting than reviewing for midterm. You know, if this was a face-to-face class, I think it would be easier to participate because you'd know each other better. And there's, by now we would have had some trust. But this is difficult. But, you know, if somebody speaks and you don't agree, you don't have to speak, but do so if you want, and just hear each other out. So do others wish to speak? Or should I go back to my mundane review?
I think a major issue, Professor, is that
Who's speaking?
Robert.
Oh, okay.
I think a major issue that's going on now is that because we are like inside majority of the time, it is a lot easier to like have the ability, not saying like it wasn't present before, but a lot of the issues that people have like throughout like the world, like name country, like oppression A, you know, opposed to oppression B over here. Like now we have the ability to look at all of it at like a wider scale than we did before. And I think like a major issue is like, you know, what should like you truly care about as a person? Like, yeah, all these topics are important, but like where do you put your energy to? And like then like you have to, I guess, kind of remember like where in the grand scheme of things, like what can like one individual do opposed to like a major country like China? Like yeah, we could go on Twitter and we could say, oh, sign this petition to boycott this company from supporting them, yada yada yada. But I mean, then you're like, you know, you're like dealing with like geopolitical like stuff, and like I don't think anyone is at a position that like, you know, China or name country here will care to the extent that we think they will.
There are economic sanctions we could push for, but they don't always work. As you know, I'm Jewish, but very much against the state of Israel. And there's something called the BDS, which is boycotting Israeli products, which is trying to put financial pressure on Israel till they stop stealing land and stop providing Palestinians with medical services. Only 17 Congress people have supported that out of 435 House of Representatives and another 100 in the Senate. You know, so I'm in, you know, you can get involved in things. But, and a lot of people in this class are involved in specific movements. It's harder to do now because we're kind of trapped inside, but, and I would say that's a major difference in many senses from the 1960s, where people were out there marching, but it was basically internal. And that even became racially separated by the mid 60s. You know, there are things that can be done. And I think you're right that you have to kind of pick your battles and see what would be effective. I mean, I do stuff that I don't talk about in class because it's, you know, not neutral the way I should try to be. And actually, if you think I'm saying things now, you should hear what I really think, which is far more to the left than what I'm saying now. And, you know, I think you gotta, it's a scary world. And because the media is so different now, we know more things, but it's also diluted. You know, it was easier when there were 3 networks and people actually read newspapers. Other thoughts? These are good thoughts. Okay, I'm going to put up the study guide again, but please, I just couldn't let this class go without talking about what's happening now and how connected it is to issues we've been talking about. But it's gender, it's ethnicity, and it's power. He was having a bad day. Okay. I'm going to give everybody extra credit on the midterm if Christopher gets out of his bed. What do you think, Chris? Too much pressure?
Are you serious?
Yeah. If you set up for the whole class, the rest of this class, everybody could have 2 extra points.
All right, fine. I'll sit up then.
Let's. He moves. It's alive. It's alive. Wow. Okay, everybody's starting out with 2 points plus the extra credit papers you wrote. Christopher's taking 1 for the team. Okay, the list is up there and we only got 25 minutes. These are the areas, but the questions are going to cause you to think and explain. So you don't just say Hamlet, 3 people, but you talk about how it's been used and continues to be used. Everybody really doesn't need. Go ahead.
I have 2 questions.
Okay, who is speaking?
Marissa.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. One is Rosie. Which one? What is Rosie?
Oh, that's my granddaughter.
Okay. That's what I thought, but I wasn't sure. And the other one is, I can't pronounce it, but it's under Pequot.
Petrakis. He's the guy that wrote the article about Baba Nikos about attacking the Greek grocer. But
Okay.
again, that's about assimilation and other. And as with Hernandez, how do people act, from being the other? And how do people not spell? Okay. Okay, others?
Could you go over Vikings?
Yeah. We know that the Vikings were here 500, 600 years before the other European countries came. So what's important is to know where they were. And we talked about that, and it's in that little beginning section, I think pages 22 through 23. But it's also important to see how they were erased from history, how that wasn't taught in school. And one of the big issues for me, and this gets back to what Ibrahim was talking about, is why don't we talk about certain things? And the Vikings didn't fit into this Northern Europe, to this English dominant narrative Anglo-Saxon narrative that we had. Also, it's a pretty cool series on TV. Has anybody watched it? I gave up.
Yeah.
Did you watch?
There's another show on Netflix that's like similar to it called The Last Kingdom. That's really good. That talks about like the Vikings and like the European, like the like battles, or like how they were somewhat allies at times too, and stuff like that.
Okay, I haven't seen that one, but I might look that up. Okay, what else from the list?
Hernandez.
Okay, she was the wrote Para Teresa. And again, she was what were the pressures on her? What was her decision? What was Teresa's decision? And again, it's this pressure to move towards a norm. And let me actually connect that to Booker T. Washington. Where did Booker T. Washington, we talked about him yesterday and I gave you that poem, feel that African Americans should start at? Remember the debate he had with Du Bois? The Atlanta Compromise, which is up there also.
He wanted them to start at the bottom.
Yeah, start at the bottom. Teresa's teacher she was defying them by not being a mediocre seduced by being a superstar. She was going against their ideology, which was also reflected in Booker T. Washington. And Teresa was also defying them, but by being a rebel, not going along at all. So Hernandez beat them at their own game, and Teresa just wouldn't play. And that's why she said we have something in common. We were both defying their rules. Notice the rather slick connection I gave you to Booker T. Washington. And if you look at the video from yesterday, that poem at the end between Booker T. Washington and William E.B. Du Bois is an issue still going on today too. What else?
Disease.
Okay, what role did diseases play? And we know the cliches, right? It wiped out, 90% of the first people in New England. But we also want to look at the ideology behind the diseases. And what was that?
Was it that the diseases were like God's way of like wiping out like the Native Americans?
Yeah, God's will. By the grace of God, they've died. God justified this. And that gets into color and race. We talked and read about how Black has been given to the devil. And you should look at that chapter. Okay, what else? So again, this is getting beyond the 90%, but going to see how it was used. I won't ask you about Rosie, I promise.
Order 9066.
969, order 9066. That was from the first lecture on authorization. Does anybody know? It was the incarceration of all the Japanese on the mainland of the United States, which was over 100,000 people, 2/3 of whom were citizens. Please note that none of the Japanese on Hawaii, another 200,000, were put in camps. And that's because they were being exploited by the economy. They were working on plantations. We'll read a lot more about that after the midterm. But the big thing here is how far our government has gone and still goes to institutionally isolate people. And if these laws get passed, it's going to happen again. What else?
When race, I guess when you put that, are you talking about like the difference between race and ethnicities, or?
Yeah. What is the difference? Educate me.
Isn't race that like it's just a social construct, like biologically it can't be proven? Like through DNA you can prove someone's like ethnicity and their heritage, but you can't prove race.
Okay, well, kind of. Yeah, that's part of it. But somebody else, what else does race do?
Race is what was created to cause segregation, like blacks and whites, colored, and like how you spoke. One of the examples you gave were like back then, if you were like Italian, you were considered someone who was black, and it was just something to use to say no, you can't, like the separate the whites, and this is for people that are of color. So it's not like it really doesn't exist. And then ethnicity is like your culture, your background, and like where you're from, things like that. So race doesn't really, it doesn't have any meaning behind it, but it was just created to cause segregation.
But it has, but as you pointed out, it has so much meaning behind it. It's used to exclude and it's used to include. It's give to privilege and take away privileges. Ibrahim and then Marissa, your hands are up.
Oh, I was going to ask, like, I don't know, it's kind of trivial, but if you say like you can't really prove it, don't they have like when somebody commits murder or something like that and they trying to do DNA evidence and they say like, oh, this was like the hair of a black man or like the skin cell of a white man or something like that.
They could do it to individuals, but they can't go blanket a whole race the way they tend to do. I don't know if you saw it last week, but a guy named Robert Bell was just released after 25 years from prison in New York State for a murder he did not commit. And that was, he was actually freed by DNA. Yes, they do it as somebody of African American heritage, but you know, that's so general. Marissa, did you have your hand up too?
I did, but that was for the 2 questions I asked before. I forgot to put it down afterwards. Sorry.
Okay. Abraham, do you have another point? What you say are questions are actually excellent points. That's good. Okay, others? You're going to hate yourself if you don't ask now. I will put this up once I finish correcting all my stuff.
The Mason-Dixon line, Dixon line.
Anybody?
Isn't that the line that separated the north and the south?
Yeah. Why is it significant?
Mm,
Has to do with 1850.
It's not 150. Is it? Is it Chevy? Oh, it is Chevy.
Somebody should mute their mic.
Didn't it determine how, well, not slavery, but didn't it determine like if a slave left, that's so they had to bring him down south?
Yeah.
I know that that's a mention of that.
Yeah, every state
Yeah.
south of the Mason-Dixon line and Missouri were slave states. And until 1850, if a slave went north of the Mason-Dixon line, legally they were free. But then in 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act was passed, which meant they had to go all the way to Canada to become free. But it's just a line that surveyors made separating the states. Guess what their names were? Would you believe they were Mason and Dixon? I'd go with that. Okay, what else? Got 10 more minutes to get these questions answered.
Can you go through what you want for European warfare?
Okay, tell me what you want, what you really, really want. I'll tell you what I want, what I really, really want. Do you guys remember the Spice Girls? I think I sing a little better than they do, but anyhow, that's just my biased opinion. Who were the indentured servants?
They were Irish, like Irish people who came over and immigrated, as well as African Americans. But there wasn't like a large population of them at first. There was only like 6%.
Oh, yeah, but did they come voluntarily?
No.
Yeah, about 75% were forced over. Many were taken out of jails, kidnapped off the streets, and dragged over here. And that's how the original European labor force came from. And it was only after Bacon's rebellion that they realized they didn't want a giddy multitude, which is not restricted to be of alliances between groups at the bottom. So they shifted the African population, African origins population, way up, stopped accepting most indentured servants, and gave them a different, so a slightly higher social class. Does that answer your question? Okay.
William Lloyd Garrison.
Okay, this is a complicated one. At first, he did not agree with David Walker. Now, what did David Walker say? Remember the appeal to the colored people? for violent overthrow of a system in both the North and the South. And Garrison, who is an abolitionist, which meant opposed to slavery, said, no, we don't want violence. But then he kind of shifted. And then you see him again with Frederick Douglass later on, where Douglass and William Lloyd Garrison were allies. And then Garrison said you could only do things through pacifism, the white abolitionist. And he and Frederick Douglass had a big split. You know, it's almost like the establishment, some people taking a risk, but on not really wanting to see seeing how far people will have to go to change the system. And he's a good example of that, I think. He's mentioned a few times in the lecture on chapter 5. You should really know about Martin Delany. And that's why I put in that long video too, not long, 9 minutes. Because we already kind of taught about Frederick Douglass, who's very important and made big contributions. I don't want to deny that. But that you should know about the birth of the nation, what it portrayed, how it justified, and in the context of the Reconstruction and redemption. What are those? And I hate using the word redemption, but that's how it's called. What was Reconstruction, when, and what was redemption? Was I talking to myself yesterday, which I often do? Anthony?
Wasn't Reconstruction the time period after the Civil War?
Yeah, where federal troops are sent to the South from 1865 to 1877 to ensure that the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment would be authorized, to ensure that former slaves would have land. And then to get elected, and this is very pertinent now, the Congress was not going to elect Ulysses Grant in 1876 because they wanted the Southern members wanted certain things. And one of the things they wanted was to get rid of the troops. And that came the period of redemption. And it's where sharecropping, which you should know about, came in. Oops, I'm putting sharecropping on my list now. Sharecropping, which we talked about, is where voting rights were taken away. And it led to the founding of the Ku Klux Klan to intimidate people. And a lot of that is portrayed as a positive thing in the movie Birth of a Nation. Now, what are the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments? Should know what they are and the years.
Did they have to do with abolishing slavery?
The 13th Amendment in 1865 abolished slavery. The 14th Amendment supposedly said that anybody born in the United States, no, the 14th Amendment gave everybody the right to vote, which is an issue that's coming up today again, because a lot of those rights are being taken away. And the 15th Amendment declared that anybody born in the United States was a citizen. Okay, and so you should know those. And again, those are in play again today. So Emancipation Proclamation, okay. Now, what's really important about this is the 13th Amendment ending slavery was in January of 1865. Lincoln gets a lot of credit for the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863. It, as I said yesterday, it freed no slaves. It only freed slaves in the territory still in rebellion against the United States, which meant they had no control over those slaves. And the states such as Maryland that were now fighting on the Union side people that were held as slaves there were not freed by the Emancipation Proclamation. The slaves in New Jersey were not freed by the Emancipation Proclamation. Anything else? We got a few more minutes.
Black codes.
Okay, look at the lectures on the Irish codes and the Black codes. These are restrictions put on Blacks, such as not being allowed to read, not being allowed to gather, not even being allowed to be freed. Okay. Irish had their own codes, not being allowed to fish, not being allowed to practice Catholicism, not being allowed to wear certain clothes. Okay, those are in the lectures, and those are in chapters 2 and 3. That it?
Jefferson solutions on Indian solutions and slavery.
Okay, Jefferson was, I used to think was a man of his times. Now I think more negatively of him. His Indian solution at times where I have great respect for them, but in reality, he wanted to set up these trading posts that would put them in debt so their land could be taken away from them. In terms of slavery, he never freed even his own children. He sort of said that slavery was immoral and should be abolished, but it shouldn't be done immediately, but over a long period, 25 years or more. And this is a key, something he shared with Delaney. Then the former slaves should be sent not back to Africa, because most had never been there, but to Africa, because whites and Blacks could not live together. He also felt Blacks were definitely inferior to whites. Anything else? Does anybody want to say, looking me in the eye, that they're not going to cheat on this?
Social stratification in Virginia.
Okay. I would normally ask it back at you, but we're running out of time. What was Bacon so pissed off about? He's a white dude. He owns some land. So what was wrong? He couldn't own more land. The rich white landowners decided that they would no longer want to allow other people to acquire land because they wanted to build up their plantations. They would not, somebody like Bacon who owned a little bit couldn't get more. And his appeal to freed white indentured servants was they would get no land at all. So it's a very stratified society with the rich white landowners at the top, free white landowners below them, and then until Bacon's rebellion, white indentured servants, and below them Black indentured servants, and above there were also some freed Blacks. But after Bacon's rebellion, you had slavery, you had a new class of very low income whites developed, and you stopped allowing Blacks to be freed. Anything else? Well, what you could do, I'm going to put this up in a minute, but what you could do also is email me over the weekend, and if you have a question, I will answer it, but I'll send the answer to the entire class, okay?
Okay.
Hey.
Okay, so we out of here? Okay. Oh, who did I want to talk to? Don't get to be my age because you can't remember. Do I need to talk to anybody? Okay, peace out.